Tesla has finally received the long-awaited full self-driving approval in China this coming following Musk's surprise visit to Beijing this weekend. And joining us now for more on what this means for the EV maker, let's welcome in Wedbush Managing Director and Senior Equity Analyst Dan Ives. Dan, it is always great to have you on the show. So I'm looking at this stock, Dan. It is just roaring higher on this headline. Let's start there, Dan. Does that reaction make sense to you?
I think it makes complete sense. Because look, Josh, this is a watershed moment. For Musk to get FSD in China, it's a game changer. This is something years in the making. No investor thought this was going to happen for the next year. He gets back on that plane from Beijing, drinking mimosas. This was a trophy case win.
Dan, why though? Because all of the other electric vehicle makers that are already competing with Tesla in China, they already have autonomous driving capabilities that have already existed. There's been, of course, price wars going on in China and stiff competition from those other electric vehicle makers. If I'm a Chinese consumer and I'm thinking about buying a car, is FSD really the thing that's going to be pushing me over the edge to buy a Tesla versus a BYD or another car?
Yeah, it's a great question, Julie. I'd say there's two reasons why this is so important. One, FSD, the autonomous vision, number one, in our opinion, being Tesla over the coming years, they needed China. In terms of just from a data perspective, when you think from an AI angle what they're doing, they needed China.
But we don't know if they can use, but sorry to interrupt, Dan, we don't know if they can actually, how they can use that data, right?
Well, yet. But ultimately, if you look what Musk's been able to do, remember years ago they said he'd never be able to build a factory in China. Now look at GIga. The point is they need Tesla as much as Tesla needs China because it's the trophy case. You look at Apple, you look at Tesla, two of the best brands in the world. That's why they allowed this with Baidu as a partner. And the reason it's so important is that Tesla almost had one hand behind its back not having FSD in China. Now they have that. And I believe what's starting to get factored in here is a demand. I'm not saying the next week or two, a demand recovery in China. But betting against Musk, it's like betting against Brunson in the playoffs.
And Dan, ultimately, it seems like, if you're a Tesla bull, are you excited because you ultimately think, listen, this potentially, the impact this has on subscription fees, on maybe even licensing this software to OEMs? Is it a margin story, Dan?
Yeah, John, I think two things. One, when you look at Tesla China, it expands the TAM. What they're going to be able to do there from autonomous, not just about the next 6-12 months, especially with Baidu. Where does this go over the next 3-5 years? I mean, when you think about robo-taxis and the autonomous vision. Two, this shows you're really starting to see Musk and China, that relationship get tighter and tighter. And that's a great thing for the stock. That's important because, as we all know, that's been the biggest overhang here. And that's why right now, the bears on Tesla, which so far have won this year, they're going back into those hibernation, into the caves.
Dan, it's my understanding, and maybe, I don't even know if you know this, but maybe if you do, we talked a few years ago to one of the other Chinese automakers who had some autonomous driving capability. And it's my understanding that the regulations are a bit different there, that you have to sort of take a course, right, before you can get an autonomous vehicle or partially autonomous vehicle. Do you know about that? And is Tesla going to be subject to that as well?
Yeah, look, I think these are things that all need to come out in terms of the next steps. But I think the important thing is this is a broader global vision. And I think for China, this is almost a shot across the bow at the U.S. in terms of on FSD. You could see them on the fast track versus what's happening here. And Tesla, that's the golden goose. They're going after China. They needed FSD. It's a key part of the long-term story. And when you see the stock up, I believe it's just the start of the longer-term vision now taking hold.
And Dan, I'm interested why you think, China decided to, in fact, greenlight this tech. Do you think it's because, officials over there, Dan, maybe they just believe that FSD is ultimately relatively safer over the long term? Do you think they were trying to extend maybe an olive branch to the U.S. as tensions are running hot? What are the reasons you think they greenlit this?
Yeah, I think it's all the above. And you have the most followed human in the world in Musk. and Musk being in Beijing, not just a photo op, that's what China wants. China wants that relationship to increase, just like they do with Apple as well. And when you look at FSD, they're going to double down on that. And you cannot double down on FSD if Tesla is not involved. And that's why I think Musk went there on the surprise visit this weekend. And he comes back with just a huge win.
Dan, so Tesla's sales in China were down almost 4% in the first quarter, while the rest of the market there was growing. And I know you sort of cautioned that this is more of a long-term story, but do we see a turnaround in the fortunes of China sales for Tesla this year?
Look, I think you're going to start to see what I believe. I'm not saying the next month, but as we get in the second half of the year, I think you see a rebound in China sales. And I think Tesla has a number of things up their sleeves that they're going to introduce in China, which will be significant. And it goes back to, as someone that's been in the region many times, massive competition, such impressive, vehicles that you see there from OEMs. But there's one Tesla. And at the end of the day, you're going to see a lot of consumers. They want to be driving a Tesla, not just in China, but in the US, Europe. And that's why I believe they are just going through a digestion period. The growth story is not done at Tesla.
Yeah, and Dan, you're kind of going where I was hoping to ask you about. Just beyond China generally, Dan, do you think maybe we're past the worst quarterly trends now for Tesla, at least for a while? The team at Canaccord, I saw that's what they were arguing to their clients this morning. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think they do great work there, George. Look, I think the worst for now, I think, is behind us. And I think this shows just a change that we're seeing in terms, not just the tone, but even with Musk. I mean, now you're seeing that pilot on the plane, starting with the conference call, now going over to China. And that's why Musk, 10% politician, 90% CEO. That's the key to the stock.
So do you think, to go back, I just want to ask you finally about the other big issue that was the overhang for the stock, and that's the questions about, the Model 2 or mini car or whatever you want to call it. Do you believe, Musk, that it's coming out, I don't know, end of this year, next year or something? What do you think is the real timeline?
Oh, I think, I'll call it a Model 2.5. I think that will be out a year from now. And it wouldn't be, so the point is, it's not a Model 2 in terms of next gen, but it's going to be a sub 30K vehicle, scaled down Model 3 with enhanced software. That's what they needed. That was music to the ears of the bulls. And that's why this week it's been a nightmare on Elm Street for the bears.
All right. I guess it has. Thanks so much. Good to see you, Dan.